In this presentation, I will talk about the impact of size-selective mortality on collective risk-taking under predation threat in zebrafish and its implications for fisheries-induced evolution. Harvesting is a kind of human-induced environmental change, and various species of plants and animals have been harvested through history for their various phenotypic characteristics. Size-selective harvesting is a kind of harvesting in which plants and animals are harvested based on the body size or the size of the specific organs. For example, deers with large antlers are specifically hunted down because they serve as excellent trophies. Large trees are specifically cut because they produce more timber. Large-sized fish are specifically caught because they are commercially and recreationally very valuable. Now, fisheries are typically positively size-selective. Both recreational and commercial fisheries catch large-sized individuals because they are highly commercially valuable. Simultaneously, certain kinds of fisheries may also be negatively size-selective, where there are upper limits to the size of the fish that might be caught. Now, negative size selection may also be operative in nature, where small-sized individuals are specifically predated upon by predators which have a limited. Selection may also happen through body size. Now, previous theoretical and empirical studies have demonstrated that positive size selection, meaning removal of large individuals generation after generation from populations, leads to the evolution of a fast life history characterized by elevated reproductive investment, early maturation at small size, reduced post-maturation growth, and reduced longevity. This may in turn foster the evolution of increased boldness or foraging activity in order to accumulate resources for high reproductive investment and rapid juvenile growth. Now, theoretical studies have also demonstrated that catching very small sized fish may lead to the evolution of boldness among fish populations, whereas catching large sized fish post maturation leads to the evolution of shyness among fish populations. Now, selection on boldness may co-vary with maturation. Positive size selection, that is removal of large-sized individuals from populations generation after generation, leads to the evolution of a maturation at small size, which means that small-bodied fish are at higher risk of size-dependent predation. This high predator-induced mortality may lead to reduction in boldness among fish populations. However, there is no empirical evidence available for all these theoretical predictions from the previous studies. And this brings us to the question of this particular study, which is to investigate how risk-taking behavior, that is boldness, changes through ontogeny, that is through maturation, in zebrafish due to size selection. We use 3 size-selected lines for our experiments. The large harvested line fish mimic the fisheries line. The small harvested line is a scenario exactly opposite to the large harvested, and the random line, harvested line, or is the control line to which we compare the responses of the large and the small harvested lines. We test boldness in presence of an aerial simulated predator and an aquatic predator, and we hypothesize that the large harvested line fish, that is the fish that mimic the fishery line, will take less risk to feed in presence of predators compared to the control line fish based on the previous theoretical predictions that we have seen. A bit of a background about the selection lines. Now, the selection lines were generated by positive, negative, or random size selective mortality for 5 successive generations, followed by a relaxation of selection for 11 generations. And we have 2 replicates for each line. So first, we investigate risk-taking to feed under aerial predation threat. We use F16 larvae produced from F15 adults of the 3 selection lines. We stock groups of 8 larvae into individual holding tanks, 10 groups per line, and a total of 60 groups. So during the experiments, we released a group of fish into the experimental arena, and we allowed them to explore the arena for 2 minutes. after which we dropped the food on the water surface. We allowed them to feed for 30 seconds, after which we released the simulated predator. Now, this is a paper cutout of a bird, as you can see. We allowed the bird model to remain hanging over the water surface for 15 seconds, after which we retrieved the bird model, and we allowed the fish to feed for 5 more minutes. We conducted these assays every week from 8 to 21 days post fertilization, that is during the larval and the juvenile stages. At 45 days post fertilization, when the metamorphosis in fish is complete. At 60 days post fertilization, when the fish transit from juvenile to the subadult stage. And then every 3 weeks during the adult stages till 190 days post fertilization. We find that the small harvested line fish were significantly bolder compared to the control line fish. We did not see a difference in boldness between the large harvested line fish, that is the fishery line fish, and the control line fish. We also found that boldness changes across ontogeny. We did not find a difference in boldness in the larval stages, that is stages A and B, as you can see, but we found a significant difference in boldness from the juvenile stage, that is from stage C, and through the adult stages till 190 days post fertilization. Next, we tested risk taking to feed in presence of a live predator. We used a convict cichlid for these experiments. We used the same group of fish from previous. We used a group of 8 adults. We conducted these experiments only with adults, and we did these experiments at the ages of around 3 months and around 4 months. 4 months. We used 7 groups per line, and we tested a total of 42 groups. We tested the fish across 4 different contexts. The first context was a control context in which there was no predator. The second context was where the fish could only see the predator. The third context was where the fish could only smell the predator. And the fourth context was where the fish could see as well as smell the predator. So during the experiments, we released a group of fish into the arena with or without the live predator, depending on the context. We allowed the fish to explore the arena for 2 minutes, after which we dropped the food, and we recorded the behavior of the fish for 5 more minutes. We found that the small harvested line fish were bolder across all contexts like the previous experiment, and this is consistent for both age groups, that is the 3-month and the 4 months age. The large harvested line fish were bolder when they perceived both the visual and the olfactory cues from the predator, that is when the predation risk was the highest. To conclude, size-selective harvesting evolutionarily alters risk-taking behavior in juveniles and adults, but not in the larval stages. Size selection alone favors the bold phenotype at all levels of risk when selection acts on the small fish, that is for the small harvested line fish. When the risk of predation was the highest, that is when the fish were presented with a live predator and the fish could both see and smell the predator, size selection typical of fisheries operating on the large fish favored boldness. With this, I would like to end my presentation.